Welcome to Prairie Adventures, a program put together for you from the interpretive program here in Medicine Hat. We're going to introduce you to some of the wildlife, the plants, and of course the people of southeastern Alberta. There's lots of stories to tell, and we hope you'll join us as we do these programs. Today, we're going to be tackling a rather serious subject. There is an invasion happening. There are invaders who are infiltrating our world, spreading out, taking over. Where do they come from? How can we stop them? We'll get to that in a minute. Let's set the scene first. Here in southeastern Alberta, it's the prairies, the grassland. And if you go for a drive, you'll see lots of areas that are still in grass, and the cows and their calves on the hillsides. If you're paying attention, you might see the pronghorns and the eagles and the hawks. Great country to live in. Some of the land is broken up, used for dryland farming or for irrigation, and there's different plants and different wildlife there as well. Listen for the birds. I like the meadowlarks. Then the rest of us, most of us actually, live in the cities or the towns. And there's wildlife here too. We all can live together, and it makes our world a much better, more interesting place when we recognize that the plants and animals around us are part of our world. People have lived on the prairies since the glaciers melted back, and there has always been the plants and animals influencing the people, and we've had an influence on the plants and animals. In the last couple hundred years, the influence that we've been having has really increased. And part of that is because we're travelers, and travel has become much easier. As we travel, we tend to bring along hitchhikers, and some of those hitchhikers can cause a problem. Plants and animals that belong here, that have been here for centuries, balance each other out. Some get eaten, some live long enough to reproduce, and others don't, but it all works together. But if we bring a plant from Europe without any of its control neighbors, it can just go crazy and become a real problem. And that's what's happened with a lot of what we call invasive species. So we're going to look at some of those invasive species today. If they're causing a problem here, then somebody has to do something about it. Alberta has designated some different levels of seriousness for some of these invaders. One example that you might know is the purple loosestrife. It's a gorgeous flower, grows about this tall, big purple flowers. You used to be able to buy it in a garden center. The kind that you bought in the garden center, we thought was sterile. It wouldn't spread seeds. Wrong, it did. And the purple loosestrife got into streams and wetlands and canals and just clogged them up. Eastern Canada has some real serious problems. Here in Medicine Hat, there was a big purple patch in the spring below McCutcheon Drive. But that was one of the first infestations in Alberta, and it was dealt with fairly promptly. So luckily, that one's under control, and you no longer can buy it in the garden center. Alberta has established a rating for these invaders. There's the low-level rating, which means, yeah, we'd rather they weren't around, but okay, we'll just sort of keep an eye on them. Next level up is called prohibited species, and those are ones that could seriously get to be a problem. And if you have them on your land, you are required to control them. More serious than that is the prohibited noxious weeds. Those are ones that will have a serious impact on the environment, a serious impact economically, so they affect all of us. And if you have those on your property, you are required to deal with them. So Alberta has this three-tier system of how they categorize invasive species. So it's one thing to make the categories, but who does it? Well, there's a lot of people on the front lines of the battle, and we're going to go talk to some of them and find out what's happening and how we all as individuals can help out battling the invaders. Right now, Lisa is down by the river, and she's talking to Dave Genio, who's with the City of Medicine Hat Parks and Recreation Department, and they're going to introduce you to one of these invaders.
Thanks, Corlane. There's many types of invasive plants, and one of those plants is flowering rush. Here with me is David Genio. He's the superintendent of parks, and we're going to talk about flowering rush today. Hi, Dave.
Hi there, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Good, thank you very much.
Good. So first, can you tell us what is flowering rush?
So flowering rush is a prohibited noxious weed that has been introduced into Alberta. It is not a native type of plant. Very pretty with nice pretty flowers, etc., but it can cause some definite issues in regards to it being an invasive species.
Okay, and what does that mean, prohibitive noxious?
So prohibited noxious is a plant species that is required to be either eradicated or taken care of right away.
Okay, and how can someone identify flowering rush?
So flowering rush is very similar to other cattail-like. It is a perennial, so it is very similar to other cattail-like perennial species that you would see in and around a water body area. What is very distinctive of it, of course, when it is flowering, it is much easier to identify that. Very nice 3-petal pink and white flowers. And they usually can get up to around 3 feet tall at full maturity. In terms of the younger stage, the leaves themselves are very triangular and they're very fleshy or spongy-like. If you were to cut them in half, you'd actually see a very distinct triangle look to them.
Interesting. So how does this plant spread? How does it get from one place to the other?
So it is a very interesting plant because it actually can spread via seed and as well through rhizomes. So it actually can, plant fragments and rhizomes can actually then continue to allow the plant to spread in a very, in an area.
And so what kind of impact does this plant have on our ecosystem?
So 1 or 2 plants isn't usually isn't really a concern. The problem is those 1 or 2 plants can of course increase into more plants, and they can eventually then grow so dense in an area that it actually can start to affect water quality. They can also start to affect fish and wildlife as well.
Okay, interesting. So how can this plant be controlled then?
So there's a few different methods. One of them is if the plant happens to be, so this particular plant can exist as an emergent plant, so a plant that's in water and then coming out of the water. It can also be submersible, and then it can also live on land as long as it has suitable moisture. In the water, usually what we try to do is to try and cut it off just to try and maintain, to not allow it to go to seed to spread any further. Other methods, if it's possible, are to excavate or dig out the plant itself. That's very sometimes difficult to do depending on the terrain. The other thing is you have to make sure when you're digging it out that you get every single type of root fragment or possibility, because those root fragments can then continue on and grow another plant. The other way, of course, it can spread as well is through seed. So seed, if it gets a chance to actually generate seed, then what will end up happening is it can then spread through the water and spread downriver, or in other circumstances the wind could pick up the seed and as well distribute it that way as well.
So has this plant been seen here in Medicine Hat then?
So we do have, last year we did start to see some showings of the plant or sightings of the plant in and along the river area. So we're doing the best and doing our due diligence to make sure that we're taking every single precaution to not allow it to get to a point where we're dealing with an infestation. Right now we are seeing small sections of the area where the plant is showing up, and we're doing what we can to try to control. In regards to other control, there is the option to go through chemical application, but that requires special permits, etc., through Alberta Environment to go that route. But we will be researching all possible aspects and possibilities for control of this plant.
Okay, great. So now if someone were to see this plant when they're out boating on the river or whatever, should they pick it, or what should they do about it? Best
thing to do is to not pick it, because picking it, unfortunately, you might, if you pull it out and it happens, a root fragment happens to get loose, etc., that can actually then spread. What we prefer is that people notify the Parks and Recreation Department that they have seen what possibility of seeing this this weed along the river, and then as best as they can give us the best description they can of where it is located, or even we sometimes will be able to meet people on site of where they were able to see the plant and try to do our best to control it.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for coming down and talking to us today. Back to you, Corlane.
It sounds like that flowering rush is poised to become another serious problem. So it's really good that people are aware of it, and I hope that now all of you are watching for it too and will report it if you find it. It's important for us to remember that all our waterways are connected, and seeds can spread, or fish can move, other eggs and seeds can spread from wetlands into our rivers. So waterways are all connected, and they all are impacted when there's a new invader. So hopefully we've noted the flowering rush, and we can, as the saying go, nip it in the bud. There's another really serious invader on our doorstep, and the province has established a thorough program to prevent it from getting into our province. If you've been out on the Trans-Canada here by Dunmore, you probably have noticed the boat inspection station. Do you know what it's all about? If you've been pulling a boat, then you should have pulled in and had it checked. But if you haven't been in there and learned all about what they're trying to do, then stay tuned, because Sophie is out there talking to the invasive mussel people.
Thanks, Corlane. Hi, I'm Sophie Filion, and I'm here at the Dunmore Way Station at the Aquatic Invasive Species Watercraft Inspection. And I'm here with Lauren today. Lauren, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much.
Can we start off by you telling us a little bit about who you are, what it is you do, and how you got interested in this field?
Sure. So I'm a third-year ecosystem management student at Lethbridge College, and I've always had a passion for fish and wildlife and stuff like that. So I was actually introduced to the job through my sister, who works for Alberta Agriculture. She's a water specialist, and I thought it would be a very good summer job just to kind of get some experience in the natural resource conservation field. So
that's awesome. So what is this inspection station? What are you inspecting here?
So we inspect all watercraft, so basically anything that goes in the water. So that includes kayaks, canoes, paddle boards, motor boats, wakeboard boats, anything that goes in the water. And basically what we're checking for are aquatic invasive species, so particularly things like zebra mussels, quagga mussels, and other invasive types of weeds and parasites.
All right, so I've heard a little bit about the quagga mussels and the zebra mussels and how problematic they are. Yeah. Could you just give us a little bit of a backstory on how they came to Canada in the first place and how they're transferred around?
Absolutely. Yeah, so the zebra and quagga mussels were actually first introduced, they came over from the Black and Caspian Sea, and so what happens is the big shipper tanks come over and they empty their ballast water into Canada's freshwater system. And so that's how they got first introduced into Canada. So out east in a lot of the Great Lakes right now, there's a huge problem with them. And basically, anytime a boater goes, boating in any of the Great Lakes and stuff, there's a chance that the mussels can actually attach to the boat and then get transported to different lakes across Canada, depending on where the boater is going to.
Okay, so if they happen to come into Alberta, and I know that's what you're trying to prevent, but if they ended up here, what would be the effect they would have? Can you describe like the ecological and economical impacts? Absolutely.
Well, for Alberta specifically, it would be particularly devastating because we have a lot of irrigation systems. So if they were to get into irrigation pipes and stuff like that, they would actually clog up the pipes, and that costs a lot of money to repair. And that's a lot of people's livelihood, a lot of farmers and whatnot. In terms of ecologically, once the mussels are in the water, they are very, very prolific. They reproduce very quickly, and once they're in the water, they're next to impossible to get rid of. So the mussels, they filter water up to 1 liter a day per mussel. And so a lot of people think, well, oh, it makes the water nice and clear, but from a biological perspective, basically all the nutrients have been taken out of the water, so it leaves nothing left for other native species to survive. And once there's clear water as well, it allows a lot of the sunlight down to the bottom of the lake, and that allows a lot of aquatic weeds to grow, which ends up taking out a lot of oxygen in the water, which can also be very bad for other species in the water as well.
Wow. So last time we filmed Prairie Adventures, we talked about wetlands and their importance, especially in our dry southern Alberta climate. Yeah. And I know they're really especially at risk. Yeah. Can the can the invasive mussels go into our wetlands, like smaller bodies of water?
Yeah, absolutely. So especially some of the more popular boating destinations for a lot of people coming through Alberta, just because a lot of the waterways are actually connected by streams and rivers and stuff like that, it allows the mussels to actually spread. And so just because there is a huge network of waterways, once they get in there, they pretty much have free rein to go wherever they like. And like I said, boats are their number one mode of transportation as well. So when the boats go in the water, they sometimes carry some of that lake water with them in the boat. And then if they go to a different water body, there's a chance of that getting spread to different other lakes and stuff. So.
But I know the government of Alberta is working really hard, and you guys are working really hard to stop this from happening.
Yeah.
So one of your campaigns, I think, is Clean, Drain, and Dry.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what the goal of this program is?
Yeah, so basically anytime, we're just reminding boaters that anytime they go boating, before they leave the lake, the boat should be clean, drained, and dry. So anything like weeds, mud, any type of water, and the mussels themselves, if you happen to see those on the boat, you definitely don't want to be transporting that. So that just means taking extra precaution to make sure that any sort of internal compartments are completely dry before you leave the lake. It's just a matter of walking around the boat and picking off any weeds that might be hanging off, or also just things like mud. Just make sure that all that kind of stuff is off of the boat before you leave the lake, because they all have the potential to carry parasites and whatnot, and you don't want to be transporting that to different water bodies as well. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. So even if I went through the whole process, made sure everything was clean and dry, would I still have to stop here at the inspection station?
You do still have to stop. It is mandatory. And also it's a very good way for us to kind of monitor some of the lakes that a lot of boaters are coming from. So all of our crew members are trained to specifically find invasive species and whatnot. So we kind of follow the protocol that we were kind of taught, and that way we can just make sure that there's nothing on their boat that shouldn't be.
That's great. So if I, for example, I would never do this, but if I just kept driving,
Yeah.
Are there consequences to not stopping if you're...
Well, there aren't any like permanent legislation right now, but we have had Fish and Wildlife officers or the DOT officers pull people back, and you know, they can get a warding or potentially a court appearance, but as of now, there's still a work in progress for having dollar amounts put into a ticket, I guess. And so some of the things that we're kind of looking into right now are potentially having a ticket for, you know, not having your plug pulled while you're transporting the boat. And then yes, again, if you do skip a station, there could also be a potential fine for that as well. So.
All right. So I know you have an inspection process that you use. Can you just tell us the general steps that you take?
Sure, yeah. So when a boater drives into the station here, typically what we do is we introduce ourselves, just make sure that they kind of know why they're here, and we kind of inform them that we're, you know, conducting watercraft inspections for invasive species. And then upon asking a few more questions, we just kind of get a better idea of where the boat has been in the last 30 days. And that's just because if they are coming from an infested lake, the zebra mussel and quagga mussels can actually survive 30 days outside of water. So depending on where they're coming from, we determine if it's coming from a high-risk area or a low-risk area, and then we conduct the proper inspection based on where they're from. So a low-risk inspection will still look in, you know, around the boat and the engine area and whatnot, but for high-risk inspections, it's a little more thorough. We go actually inside the boat, looking all inside the internal compartments and whatnot, and just make sure that all the equipment and everything else is nice and dry. And if we do find that, you know, there is standing water in there, basically we just give them a hot wash. So we have our unit here, it's a hot wash unit, and so we typically do internal compartments at 120 degrees Fahrenheit. And then if there's anything on the outside of the boat, we'll actually do 140 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's basically just the temperature that would kill the mussels or any sort of like mud and stuff like that. But just to clarify, when we actually do find mussels, the boat does have to be completely decontaminated. So basically, our inspectors, what we do is if we find standing water, that's when we'll give them a wash. So.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and then also a huge part of our job too is to actually educate the boater on what they can do just to make sure that their boat is good to go. So clean, drained, and dry. And just kind of informing them on, you know, the implications for if we did have zebra mussels here, like the different, I guess, repercussions that might come from that. So, yeah, and then that way, once you spread the word, people can kind of understand a bit better, like why we're here and why our job is so important.
Yeah, it is important.
Yeah.
So I also heard that you have a secret weapon in the form of some very special dogs that
Yes.
help you detect
Yeah, we
the
do.
aquatic invasive species.
Yeah, we do.
Can you tell us about their work a little bit?
Yeah, so these dogs, they're working dogs. They're government of Alberta employees, just like us, and basically they are specifically trained to sniff out mussels and other, you know, invasive weeds and stuff like that. So they've gone through extensive training down in the United States just to kind of hone their skills in, and they're really handy, like especially on the busy long weekends. They come and they sniff around the boats, and it's actually fun to watch them work too, because when they actually do find a mussel, what they do is they sit down, and then the handler will actually get them to point their nose like on the boat to show them where it is, and then the handler can go in and see if it actually is a mussel. And it's good because they're actually very successful with that. So, and then once they're done, we actually still go around and do our own inspection and hop inside the boat if it's a high-risk area. But yeah, we enjoy having them around too. It kind of lightens up the day a little bit.
Yeah,
so,
that's amazing.
yeah.
And now just to wrap up, do you have any other tips or tricks for people that want to stop the spread of these aquatic invasive species, but maybe that don't have watercraft of their own?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're ever out boating, or not boating, but just at lakes where, you know, just for a recreation or whatever, if you're walking along the shoreline and you happen to see something that looks out of the ordinary, like a mussel shape that's attached to like rocks or something like that, there is an invasive species hotline. It's 24 hours, and the number is 1-855-336-BOAT. So if you happen to see any sort of invasive species, or you think something might be a little off, you can just call that hotline, and they will kind of give you directions from there. Also, another thing too is if you just have aquarium pets at home, we're just recommending that people don't flush them down the toilet, especially if they're alive still, because then they just go into the water system. And sometimes they carry parasites as well, so even though you don't have a boat, you can still kind of take precautions with different things like that, and just kind of ensures that, you know, you're not spreading any invasive parasites as well. So yeah.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Lauren.
Thank you for having me.
Back to you, Corlaine.
Sometimes invasive species are really obvious, and we can see right away that they're going to be a problem. But the next one that we're going to talk about is just an innocent little pet. What's more innocent than a little goldfish swimming around in his bowl? Well, that's fine. But if he gets dumped into a pond, he now is a problem. So many people, when they get tired of pets, they don't know what to do with them, and so they dump them. And that's a serious issue. Lisa is over at Heritage Pavilion, the Strathcona Island Pond, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about what that innocent little goldfish can do.
Thanks, Corlaine. So if a goldfish can grow to the size of its fishbowl, what happens if you take away that bowl? That's a question that wildlife experts all across Alberta are trying to answer. And the answer is not looking good, at least not for a native species anyways. Wildlife experts across Alberta are warning people not to dump their goldfish into their local pond or even to flush it down your toilet, especially after they've pulled numerous dinner plate sized goldfish out of ponds all across the province. These pet goldfish are being found as far north as Fort McMurray and as far south as Lethbridge, but you really don't have to go very far to find them. Unfortunately, these goldfish can be found in quite a few ponds right here in Medicine Hat. I'm at the Heritage Pond in Strathcona Park, and there's goldfish swimming in this pond. Now, these goldfish can cause problems for a number of reasons. Number one, goldfish, they have something called indeterminate growth, which means they continue to grow throughout their life when they're not constrained by the size of a fish tank or by food being regulated, say from someone feeding them at home. So when allowed to go into a big pond like this, they have plenty of food available to them and they'll just keep growing and growing. They can get at least as big as 20 centimeters in length. Not only do they outgrow the native fish that live here, but they'll also eat just about anything in sight, including the eggs of our native fish. They also will compete for other resources such as space and room in the pond and food. These goldfish, of course, are not native to North America. They're naturally found in Europe, Siberia, and Northeast Asia. So of course our winters here are really not a problem for them at all. They don't have a problem with the cold. There's a few things that wildlife experts have tried to do to contain these problem fish. They've tried netting, they've tried minnow traps, electrofishing. These things are all very time consuming, and of course they can't guarantee that they're getting all of the fish. Another thing they've tried is actually dropping the level of the pond down so far that it freezes all the way to the bottom. This can work to kill off some of the goldfish, but it might also kill off some of our native species of fish that we want swimming around in the pond. Another thing they've tried is fish pesticides, but again, that can affect our native fish populations. It can also affect a lot of the aquatic invertebrates that other species that use this pond rely on for food, things like our birds and whatnot. So as you can tell, it's a very difficult problem. Now, these goldfish in here competing for food and other resources can really upset the delicate balance of our aquatic ecosystem and really cause a lot of problems. Another issue is your pond, even a stormwater retention pond, is likely connected to a larger water source, such as a stream, river, or lake. So if you let your goldfish go in this pond here, it could easily get out into the river, reproduce, cause a lot of other problems downstream. That's another thing. These goldfish actually reproduce faster than the native fish population. So they really have just so many advantages over our native fish. Now, Alberta has launched a program called Don't Let It Loose, and it's got great information on what you can do with your goldfish instead of letting them go in our ponds. For more information about that, you can call 1-855-336-BOAT, and they can tell you all about your other options and what to do with your fish. Even your dead goldfish, it's not a good idea to flush them. It can introduce disease, parasites, and other invasive aquatic plants into our system. The Alberta Fisheries Act has actually said as well that if you're caught dumping your goldfish or flushing the contents of your aquarium, you can be fined up to $100,000, and nobody wants that. So please, if you have a goldfish that you can't care for anymore, contact the Don't Let It Loose people, and they'll give you all sorts of options of what you can do with that fish. Thank you.
I'd like to thank everyone who's been involved in producing this segment, the City of Medicine Hat, Parks Department, the bylaw, the province. We all have to work together to maintain the health of the ecosystem here in Alberta, and there's an awful lot of people that are putting a lot of thought and effort into keeping this be a wonderful place to live. If you would like to know more about any of these topics and would like to get more involved, please come on down to the Nature Centre. We're open Tuesday through Sunday, 9 to 5. You can give us a call on the Nature Line, 403-529-6225. And of course, you can visit us on Facebook and Twitter and all those sort of things too. We have lots of information and we love to talk to you. And all of us are important in protecting Alberta against invasive species. See you soon.